Josh, you're first, then Arthur.
Okay, so let me do a little table setting myself.
Are we live?
Yes, we're live. Thank you. And we have the full committee here, I think. Maybe not Senator Ballant at this point.
Becca was on the phone, but anyway.
So anyhow, we've been requested by, as Earhart said, there was a report commissioned last year or last session. We're going to hear about that. We've been asked to hear about mobile home issues by the Affordable Housing Coalition and others. We don't have a bill, but there are several vehicles out there that if we wanted to make legislative changes, we will have time to do so. So this is the first, and there'll probably be another hearing to set the table of what the needs and issues are out there specifically for the mobile home community and creation of more units. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh and pass along my congratulations on your work in Joint Fiscal Committee yesterday.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Housing and Community Development. I can be very brief. I know there's lots of folks here. You know, mobile home parks, mobile home owners, renters is a very important part of our affordable housing in Vermont. There are concerns with the age of many of the mobile home parks. And I would go so far as to say the age of the owners of the mobile home parks. Many of the owners are aging out of ownership. Many of those that are privately owned that were developed 30, 40 years ago are leaving. And that's a concern of ours. And that what is so important here as well to recognize, and I think what you want to talk about today, is that the per unit cost of maintaining this form of affordable housing is very cost effective when you look at the alternatives that we have out there in developing, new, even multifamily. Maintaining mobile home parks and ownership for folks is a very affordable form of affordable housing. And many folks prefer that as a form of housing. They prefer four walls that they can control and in the setting that they prefer. And when you look at the cost benefits of this type of housing, it's worth our investment to continue. And so I will just stop there and listen to everyone else to save time.
I would just say that we, on our housing tour in the St. Albans, Senator Brock, you remember there was a private mobile home operator who was very impressive in his testimony. So we did hear about that. Yeah.
And as we tee this subject up, Josh, would you just remind us all how many mobile home parks, how many mobile home units we guesstimate or know are in that we have in the state?
Yeah, I'll have Arthur do that because I'll get the numbers wrong. But in mobile home park, it's about 7,500, and he'll give the exact detail.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Arthur Hamlin. I work at the Department of Housing and Community Development with Josh, as you know, handling the mobile home park program. So yeah, we do the registration of the parks every year. So I can tell you pretty specifically, there's 239 registered parks in the state in 2020. And by the statute, a park in Vermont is a property that has 3 or more mobile homes or mobile home lots on it. About a quarter of those, or 64 of the 239 parks, are owned by nonprofits and cooperatives. And then the majority, that's 175 parks, are owned by private for-profit owners. And most of those are, most of the parks are small in Vermont. The average park is only about 15 lots. So we don't have very many big, large parks. And most of the owners, particularly the private owners, are people that own, they're just Vermonters. They own one park. There's not, we don't have very many big investor-owned parks or groups of like real estate investment trusts that in some parts of the country are, buying up parks. There's a few parks in Vermont that are owned by some out-of-state operators that have multiple parks in more than one state, but predominantly they're small and own just one park. Altogether around 7,000, just over 7,000 mobile home lots in the registered parks. Yeah, and that's basically the lay of the land. And I agree with, Josh, I talk to the park owners more probably than residents, just in the, because we oversee the rent increases and the registration and park sale notices. And they're getting, and what I'm hearing from them is that they don't have children who want to take over the park, and that there definitely seems to be a need for infrastructure repair. And for the private park owners, one point Josh and I talked about this morning was that the private owners, they don't have the same access to low interest loans and grants and financing to make improvements to their park that the nonprofits and cooperatives can sometimes access. And so that either results in large lot rent increases to when a park owner needs to replace septic systems, replace the water system, whatever. Or, and this seems to come up pretty often, is it's just deferred maintenance. And then if the park is bought by a nonprofit or a cooperative of the residents, they have to contend with fixing the park and getting the money to, and they're not paying, cut rate low prices for the parks. And one thing that I think Laura will talk about maybe, is particularly the larger parks. There's a couple in Colchester that are currently going for sale. The asking prices are pretty steep. And if you add on to that, the deferred maintenance and improvements that need to be made to the park, that just becomes a huge challenge for the co-ops and the nonprofits to do that. And I'll stop there. I see Allison, Representative Clarkson has her hand up. Senator, sorry.
Arthur, I owe you an email. Speaking of subjects you've just been discussing, but would you be kind enough to remind us? We had a fairly lengthy discussion last year about the move of these private owners into selling to park residents in the succession planning into cooperatives. Is that making progress? Is that continuing to be something that you're enabling, and how's that going?
Yeah, it does seem to be. Last year, for a lot of reasons that were from 2020 was a pretty slow year as far as like park sale notifications that we received. I mentioned there's two large parks in Colchester that are owned by Bros Mobile Home Parks that came up for sale, and the residents of both those parks are trying to buy them as cooperatives. So in the last couple of years, there haven't been very many sales generally, but the trend does seem to be more often, if a park is sold to a nonprofit or co-op, most of the time those are being purchased by the cooperatives rather than the nonprofits in the state. And there's different reasons for that. One of them is just frankly that in the long run, if the residents can own their own park and manage their own park, and not have any landlord, even a benevolent, good nonprofit landlord, that's still, that's the best outcome really. And the nonprofits are definitely willing to look at considering parks, but they generally will defer. If the residents are interested in purchasing it, then that's the way, they want to go.
So I go back with Arthur decades, and he's a real treasure to the state. Thank you for your service.
You're here.
A lot of what you're talking about, I think the answer to the solution is money. And I'm just wondering, of this new money that we're getting from the federal government, how can we squeeze in the needs of mobile home parks and tenants to get some of that money? Can they get lot rent? Can there be assessments imposed that could take the form of utility payments and things like that we can somehow fashion relief to mobile home park and their tenants?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a need for that. I know that mobile home park residents were eligible for the rent assistance and the mortgage assistance program that finished up at the end of 2020. Probably I think other people on the list of witnesses today might have more information about I'm not specifically too involved in a lot of the COVID relief money that's coming into the state or setting up those programs. So I might leave that to Josh, or one of the other people might know more than me.
Yeah, I would like to hear, maybe not today, but in terms of creativity for the money, or maybe more flexible money, you always hear about maintenance and utilities in mobile home parks. I'm wondering if, things could be sort of bridge the line between capital expenses and ongoing expenses, and have monthly assessments to pay for things. And then those could then be swept in as an allowable cost for fixing up mobile homes. So we'll
I
talk
see.
more about.
Yeah. I mean, a park owners today they can do lot rent increases, and they can have what's called a capital improvement surcharge. So if there is a specific expensive project that they need to do, they can. It is still a lot rent increase. It's still eligible to be challenged through mediation, but the difference is that it has a time limit, and frequently. What they'll do is if they and for the private park owners, they usually just need to go to a bank and borrow the money. They will basically take that loan payment and divide it out amongst the residents for whatever the length, so it almost matches the loan. If they have a 20-year loan, then there's a surcharge for 20 years to pay for that. So that is a way a private park owner or any park owner can raise money or to pay back something like that. But you're still talking about a really substantial lot rent increase on the residents. There isn't really for the private park owners, there's not really any other sources of money to do that kind of thing.
Okay.
Senator, if I could jump in just to answer your question quickly, we don't know yet what the ERA might provide for mobile home parks. We're going to, as you know, await Treasury guidance. We're hoping that lot rent will certainly be covered, and I think we're also hoping that a broader, expansive definition of housing-related costs in mobile home parks would be covered by the ERA. Laura will speak to this. There's also some of the social support money that can be used for outreach, possibly to mobile home park residents who are very isolated. So I'll just stop there. I think it's to be determined, but I just wanted to kind of jump in and try to answer your question really directly.
But the utility piece of it would absolutely, they'd be eligible for it.
Absolutely, yes. That I assume utilities are part of overall housing costs. The only other area where you might see some flexibility potentially is maybe there could be some light renovations or light energy improvements, depending on how flexibly Treasury looks at some of the broader language that's in the statute. But capital dollars are clearly out.
Yeah, we're living in hope.
Okay, so Earhart, I'll just turn to you and you pick the next witness.
Thanks, Senator. I really appreciate that. I was going to ask Jen, because she, like Arthur, has table setting testimony. And can I also remind committee members that each of the witnesses has posted handouts, quote unquote handouts. So they're all available. I don't think we have time for screen sharing, but folks can certainly follow along. And Jen, we have a piece from the Affordable Housing Coalition that Jen is going to be speaking from in terms of sort of overall infrastructure needs for the parks. So if I could ask Jen to be next.
Good morning, committee. Jen Holler from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. As you know, VHCB's responsibility is not only to create or support the creation of affordable housing, but also to preserve it. So we have invested state funds in many of the nonprofit, or actually most of the nonprofit and cooperatively owned parks throughout the state. You might recall that last year we came in and testified and shared with you that through our stewardship and oversight responsibilities, we began to see a theme of mobile home park owners struggling with a variety of issues. So we commissioned a study that was conducted by John Ryan, and we presented that to you. I can actually resend it if you like. Last January, there were 5 major areas in which parks were being challenged, and it's our assumption that the same challenges that some of these nonprofit and co-op owned parks are experiencing are also being experienced by the private owners of mobile home parks or mobile home communities, as we like to begin to talk about them. There are large-scale capital needs having to do with infrastructure, and in some instances, there's a limited development capacity on the part of the owners in order to secure the various sources that are needed to address those infrastructure needs. Just as a big overview, there are generally fewer sources, federal and state, that are available to assist mobile home parks than there are for other types of housing. So that's a limiting factor. Some parks are experiencing operational and financial sustainability challenges related to, well, they want to keep and are required to keep the rents low, and sometimes that doesn't always allow them to invest in the capital needs when big infrastructure challenges come along. Many, as you are aware, are at risk of flooding, and their homes in low-lying areas. They've been impacted in the past and are at risk of being impacted again. There are small-scale capital needs in many of the parks. The cost of removing abandoned homes. There are additional costs related to new HUD standards around foundations. And many parks can have their replacement reserves aren't quite sufficient to meet those needs. So over time, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board has been able to grant funds to projects to help address some of these. And in just the last few years, we've funded some infrastructure improvements and helped with refinancing of parks in Bennington, and beginning to do so now in Addison County. We've also made investments in zero energy modular homes that have gone into parks that replace either abandoned homes or are creating new housing on vacant lots. And most recently, we did that with some of the CRF funding. There are 8 new homes that are, some of them have been delivered and others are being delivered over the course of the next few weeks. And those will be specifically made available to people who are experiencing homelessness related to the pandemic. So VHCB as a funding source is able to help address some of these, but the scale and the need that was identified through the Ryan report and that is outlined on the documents that Erhard has submitted to you just far exceeds what VHCB is able to address. So there are 4 things, actually maybe 5, that I asked the committee to consider as it thinks about this. One would be to continue to urge the congressional delegation to think about the need to address housing capital broadly, but mobile home parks specifically, as it assembles the next COVID relief or recovery packages. The second would be to do the same with a congressional delegation around the idea of including housing specifically in their big infrastructure proposal that is under development now, and to include mobile home park infrastructure specifically in that. At the state level, we of course would love it if you could be supportive of the administration's proposal for additional one-time funding to VHCB of $20 million, and we would use some of that to address some of these needs. We also were very excited to see the administration's proposal to expand the state affordable housing credit specifically for the purpose of expanding what's known as the Manufactured Housing Down Payment Program, which I believe Becca can speak to later. That's a really very effective tool for helping people replace older homes in exchange for more energy efficient homes. And that can happen in parks or on private land, but that's been a really important and successful tool over the last few years. The legislature created it after Tropical Storm Irene, and it's not meeting its potential. So
One more.
I guess I would also just finally mention that since Tropical Storm Irene, VHCB has been providing capacity support and technical assistance and just trying to help where we can with the Tri-Park Mobile Home Park as they wrestle with their infrastructure and floodplain issues. And we would love to see them be able to address those, and others on the call, particularly Mary Houghton, can speak to that. So I will stop there and answer questions.
Thank you, Jen. I guess I have one general question. when you get your appropriation from the state, is there any guidelines for a specific set aside for mobile home park issues, or is that a decision made by your board?
It's the latter. It's a decision made by the board. So we have guidelines roughly about how much we allocate between housing and conservation. And then within housing, there's a whole range of activities that that get funded out of that portion, and our board makes that decision. It's rental housing, home ownership through homeland and shared equity, mobile home parks, and some other smaller programs like home accessibility through the Vermont Center for Independent Living.
Is there guidelines, written guidelines, or is there precedent that you follow each year saying, okay, mobile homes get 10% of your assistance or something like that?
It's largely driven by the needs and the projects that come to us. And then we survey our organizations, and we've shared with the committee before what the pipeline of need and project is looking out a year or two ahead. And that's where our board makes those decisions from. And also the needs, but then also what other federal sources or other sources are out there that where we can leverage and bring more dollars in. So that's part of this, frankly, part of the strategy too.
Good. Thank you. Earhart.
Thank you, Senator. Next up would be Mary Houghton, who's a board member of the Tri-Park Cooperative Housing down in Brattleboro, and also Mary has some handouts that you can follow along that identify the specific capital needs of Tri-Park and where it's located for folks who are not familiar.
Hi, Mary. Long time no see.
Well, only a year, Senator, because I was here last year, and the handouts are actually pretty much the same because we didn't make a whole lot of progress. But just to remind everybody, Tri-Park is 3 separate mobile home parks in Brattleboro with a total of 304 homes housing around 900 people. These homes are some of the most affordable housing in Brattleboro because there's no rental assistance, and lot rents are around $300 a month. But Tri-Park does face those threats to its stability: aging and failing infrastructure, and households in the direct path of the next flooding event. I think on one of the handouts, there's a picture of a flood that was just from, winter snow and ice melt. Tropical Storm Irene was absolutely devastating. And everybody in the floodway expects more flooding. Over the last 3 years with consultants, we developed a master plan to quantify and outline a path to addressing these needs. The plan showed projected costs of around $4 million, which is still under $20,000 per unit, which, as people before me said, is about as inexpensive as you can find for preserving housing. It's broken down between sewer upgrades and bridge replacement, and then over $3 million to develop about 36 new housing sites within Mountain Home Park and assist 20 households to move out of flood danger. We expect to be able to draw some funding from co-op reserves and refinancing existing debt, but we estimate we will still need over $2.5 million in grant funding. The provisions of Act 79 are certainly going to help, although not being a developer, I certainly can't say how much they're going to help at this point. Staff from DEC have begun talking to Tri-Park staff about possible methods for loan restructuring. Last winter, when I spoke with you, we were looking forward to finding a developer to work with us, but then the pandemic hit, and the board shifted to making sure our residents had food, and that's a continuing project of the Wellness Committee, and also trying to figure out how to meet, because not everybody was or is ready to use Zoom. We did receive a second planning grant from the Housing and Conservation Board, and we finally hired a consultant to draft an RFP to find a developer. Our staff just did not have the capacity to do it last year. We hope to be able to publish the RFP within the next month or so, and we still think we're going to need about $4 million. So that's briefly where we are now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I didn't interrupt you, but in almost your first sentence, I was very curious. You said you have no rental assistance. How could that be, given that we gave $25 million out and we're giving out $110 million to people who clearly would qualify for lot rental assistance?
I'm sorry. I was thinking of more like Section 8 ongoing rental assistance. We did get well over $30,000 from the rent stabilization program last year.
Okay. And it would seem to me if most of the people are low to moderate income there, they should all qualify for at least their lot rent and utility under this new program.
Right.
Okay.
They should. It was a little bit hard getting them to apply, however. Our park manager had to kind of chase people down to get them to sign paperwork. They don't like taking assistance.
Yep. It's one of the reasons I've been questioning how much money is going to be able to get out the door. But anyhow, I hope the most money possible gets out the door.
Yeah, I agree.
People, I think also on that whole marketing to people taking advantage of these things, it's their tax dollars coming back to roost. I mean, people, it's like our money. It's not like it's somebody else's money. So it's, in a way, you've put it in with your taxes. Here is a great opportunity to take advantage of your own tax dollars.
Okay. We're short on time. Thank you very much, Mary. Appreciate it. And we've got
Thank you, Mary.
We've got our eye
You,
on
Senator.
Tri-Park. You know that.
I
Okay.
know. Thank you.
Earhart.
Senator, if we could hear from Laura Mistretta next, followed by Becca, and then hoping we can fit in the folks from DEC and Seth.
Okay, Laura.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Mistretta, and I'm a resident organizer with the CVOEO Mobile Home Program. I'm here today to talk about the impacts that we've seen COVID-19 has had on the communities we serve and some of the changes that we think are needed to support the elderly folks, disabled people, essential workers, and children who call these communities home in the coming months. As you've heard, mobile home parks are a critical source of affordable housing here in Vermont. Many of these communities are small and located in rural parts of the state. And as we all know, internet access is a challenge in rural Vermont, and mobile home parks are no exception. Moreover, the cost of internet and technology is often a barrier for the people we serve, many of whom are living on very fixed incomes. Last thing to say on this is technological literacy is definitely an additional challenge facing people and should be kept in mind if programs are being developed to extend technological access throughout Vermont. In non-pandemic times, the CVOEO mobile home program primarily communicates with residents via phone, mail, and in person. The impact of COVID-19 has meant that we are making every effort to ensure that internet access is not a barrier to people being able to access critical resources and exercise their rights. Access to technology has been a barrier for folks to even connect with programs like the Rental Housing Stabilization Program. The CVOEO Mobile Home Program conducted a phone survey of 166 clients we have served over the last 5 years in April and August to determine the impact of COVID-19 on individual households and communities. Through these conversations, we were able to inform people about programs like the Rental Housing Stabilization Program, and when necessary, mail them copies of the application so they could apply. Oftentimes, this was the first time they were hearing of these programs. We're very grateful to the nonprofits and cooperatives who have taken proactive steps to ensure their residents are well informed. However, we know that not every housing provider or cooperative has the capacity for this type of outreach, not to mention that still leaves out the majority of mobile home parks, which are privately owned, as you've heard, And so we feel there's a real need for proactive outreach to inform people of the resources available to them and also encourage people to apply and assist them in that process of applying. Another way our work has really changed is, you also heard about the 2 communities in Colchester that were noticed for sale, that it's a total of 235 lots in those 2 communities in Colchester. Typically, the Department of Housing and Community Development hosts an in-person informational session with residents to discuss their rights upon a park going up for sale. Due to COVID-19, this information session was held virtually. Resident leaders expressed concern to our office that this would prevent participation from a significant portion of their neighbors. So we responded to these concerns by creating a series of flyers that could be left at people's doors to ensure they were kept informed and able to participate in the sales process without internet. We were fortunate that we had pre-existing relationships with key resident leaders with whom we were able to coordinate to distribute information as widely as possible. And it was also fortunate that these communities are located close to our Burlington office, just in Colchester. As of now, like you heard, both these communities are in the process of exploring cooperative ownership, which is very exciting. But we are concerned that if we did not have relationships in these communities or easy access to these communities, due to our capacity, this outcome likely would not have been possible to facilitate that whole process. The last point I want to make is something that we've also already been touching on, but that there is a clear trend of mobile home park residents we have heard about or spoken to who, regardless of their financial status, always make sure to prioritize paying their lot rent or have rent automatically withdrawn from their accounts. So even though they may experience changes in income or living expenses associated with COVID-19, people have chosen to cut back in other ways on utility bills, property tax payments, or other housing costs. CVOEO Mobile Home Program would really like to see new federal COVID relief dollars applied to the supportive services component of emergency rental assistance and for flexibility in the type of housing costs that can be covered. This money should support outreach to mobile home residents and increase flexibility so that people who are trying to do the right thing by prioritizing their lot rent are not left out of the monies meant to support them through these trying times.
Okay.
Thank you. And yeah.
Well, we would hope that most of the lot rent payments during this period under the new law get picked up, and that's going to require a big outreach effort, as you said. I do have a question on, and this is for you or Arthur. Is there any legal changes we could make to make sure that the transition from private ownership to the park residents can be facilitated? I mean, you identified a big issue we're dealing all the time with COVID and how existing laws may not be able to be complied with because of the challenges of COVID. It sounds like you overcome it in these 2 purchases, but maybe there are steps down the road that still have to be complied with, that we could make a legal change that could make it easier. We're faced with that in a lot of areas. Just this morning, we're changing a law to make things easier for people because of COVID. Do you see any changes in that statute that, Arthur, maybe that could help facilitate a purchase?
Yeah, I was gonna defer back to Laura. So we did think about this, and CVOEO brought to our attention that in the statute there's a very limited 45-day time period for the leaseholder, the mobile homeowners in the park, from when they get the notice the park is for sale to submit a petition to Josh and to the park owner that they want to exercise their right. So during that time, we normally, set up an in-person meeting, with CVOEO, with myself, with a nonprofit or a cooperative organizer. It was difficult. It was more difficult to do that. We did figure out a way to make that work for these 2 parks that came up for sale. I don't know if, I mean, it seemed like we got it to work out, and Laura might want to comment on whether changing that deadline, because that would be a statutory change, whether that would help or not. The other deadline that was difficult to deal with was lot rent mediation, which again is something that normally happens in person, and there was only a couple of requests for lot rent mediation last year, but again, trying to do that virtually, particularly when a lot of the residents don't have the access or the technology expertise to do that online. It was a little more difficult.
Well, if other issues come up where you could use our help in terms of that during this COVID, we've been doing a lot of extension work here, rightfully so. So let us know. It's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Senator, if I could jump in, we'll certainly take that as a cue to have further discussions. One of the things that we did bat about in our mobile home committee was the possibility of pegging, much like you did with the eviction and foreclosure moratorium, pegging something onto a gubernatorial declared emergency and just having an automatic extension of some of those deadlines during an emergency. So we can discuss, further, and we'll kind of talk amongst ourselves, maybe come back with a recommendation.
Okay. Who do you got? Yeah, Becca next, right? Welcome.
Yes, if Becca could go next, that'd be great. She's going to speak to the mobile home tax credit that's part of the governor's proposed budget.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. I am the loan fund manager at the Champlain Housing Trust, and I have worked with the manufactured housing down payment loan program since it started in 2012. As Jen mentioned, this started in response to Tropical Storm Irene, and so many homes were lost during that storm, particularly manufactured homes. And at that time, it was realized that there were minimal financing options for the purchase of manufactured homes, and they consisted mostly of personal property loans with high interest rates. So this program allows us to offer 0% interest loans that are deferred until the sale, transfer, refinance of the home. $27,500 can be used for the purchase of an Energy Star rated home, and $35,000 for the purchase of a net zero energy modular home. Since the program started, we've helped over 216 households. And local banks and credit unions have partnered with us to offer more affordable financing for mortgages, which has been great. At the current funding level, we're able to help about 30 households per year. And with this proposal, we may be able to do about 60. We receive 100 applications per year as it is, so I think there's definitely potential to increase the amount of people that we serve. Most of the buyers that we serve have incomes less than $45,000 per year, and also they're only spending 33% or under per month in housing costs, which is very affordable to them. And while this program started as a response to a national disaster, we realized that it started to help people with their own personal crisis. We had a story last year where someone lost their mobile home to a fire, and she was living the spring and summer in a camper, but she was really desperate to find something more permanent. She did get some insurance money, and she was able to combine that with our down payment program to buy a new home. And she lives on Social Security, and her income is just a little over $10,000 per year. So it's definitely made a huge difference for people.
So this is a zero interest deferred loan?
Correct.
For an energy efficient mobile home that could be the loan could be up to 37,000 or thereabouts?
The loan itself for our program is $27,500, and then they would partner with another bank or credit union to meet the usually a purchase of a new single wide is about $60,000 to $65,000.
Okay, so the governor's proposal would double the amount that you could use, and if we tripled the amount, you pretty much meet the demand. You
Correct.
go from 60 to 90, and you have 100 per year.
Correct.
And is
And
there
that's statewide, not just with Champlain Housing Trust.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
has there been any history or problem with the program in terms of not repaying these loans? I mean,
Because they don't require monthly payment, we only get notified if somebody wants to sell or refinance, and that has happened. There's been 3 homes that have turned over to new households. So then they just assume the loan going forward.
okay. Thank you very much. It's interesting.
yeah,
Senator, if I could jump in and add just a quick piece. One of the identified needs, and Jen spoke to this earlier, is for replacement of abandoned homes, as well as replacement of really outdated, inefficient homes. And this is the program that really can help fill that part of that sort of spectrum of needs that the Ryan study identified.
yeah, it's just interesting to see how it's been taken up around the state. Only 1 in Bennington County. I mean, so we need to get increased distribution and more.
I agree.
Senator
Yeah.
Rahm. Senator Rahm.
So Laura's no stranger to hearing me talk about this because we've been working on some projects together. But if this was a different kind of disaster than a pandemic, we'd probably be looking at flooding issues, and we'd probably be having a much higher impact for people in mobile home communities. I think Art is the first one who pointed that out to me when I was on the housing committee on the House side, that in Irene, people in mobile home communities make up approximately 8% of the state population, but 40% of those who were affected by the flooding of Irene. The EPA has just added flood areas to their EJ screen tool, which is a mapping tool that I hope we use more often in the state between ACCD and ANR. And I'm wondering if there are any plans to start to look at flood preparedness resiliency and start to map out those vulnerabilities in our mobile home communities moving forward, especially as we're trying to get resources and think about weatherization. I don't think we want to do that in places where their mobile home could be underwater.
Well, I think Mary Houghton spoke to that because Tri-Park has an active plan to do just that, and there are clearly others around that would need to do that. But moving lots is probably a statewide issue, and not peculiar to Tri-Park. But I think Tri-Park probably has the largest need.
Jen,
Jen,
Michael,
I see you, but I want to plow through if we can, see if we can get through all the witnesses. So Earhart, who's next?
I believe the folks from Department of Environmental Conservation are next, and I think Teresa. Oh, there you are. I think you were going to lead off, if I understood correctly from Seth, or maybe it was Eric. I'm not 100% sure.
Nope, that's fine. Eric and I had a question. My name is Teresa Thomas. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds at DEC. Eric is our Director of Engineering. So we wanted to ask the committee if they wanted to first hear about the plans to restructure specifically the Tri-Park loans, or if you wanted to hear about some of the future action items addressed in 179.
I think the latter, and I think we're going to have you folks in next week as well. You may not be aware of it yet, dealing with the mini TIFs and special projects. So if you can consolidate your testimony, maybe try and make it brief, and we can follow up next week when you come in. But I certainly want to hear about the 179 progress.
Okay.
Senator, if I may, we do have Senator Ballant here today, and she's not with you always, and Mary Houghton. So, Teresa, if you could touch on the Tri-Park, maybe at least briefly as well.
You want me to do that quickly, Teresa? So last year I testified and explained the loan programs that we manage, and in the case of Tri-Park, there are actually 3 loans that we've provided for the park. 2 are through the municipality, through Brattleboro, but all of the debt on that is covered by the park, as far as we understand it. The total debt between those 3 loans is, at this point, the principal is about just under $4 million remaining. And that equates to an annual payment of $254,000. When we submitted the report, the Act 179 report in January, the work that we were doing leading up to the publishing of that report, we had estimated at that point that we could lower the annual debt by about 30%, which is roughly $76,000. Since then, we've been sharpening our pencils, doing a little more homework on this, and at this point, it looks like it may be as much as 100,000, give or take. There's still some things to work out. We have to verify the useful life of all the assets. We have to make sure that we, in fact, can extend out the terms for all 3 loans based on the weighted average of the useful life of all of the components. So we're working kind of backwards on work that was done years ago to those computations. 2 of the loans are municipal, 1 is directly to the mobile home park. And I believe the next repayment isn't due until June. So we've got a little bit of time here to get this worked out on the major part of that debt service. That $100,000 reduction, if we're able to get to that level, it's a combination of extending out the term and also extending the amount of subsidy that they're getting on 2 of those loans, which were set at -3%, which we now convert to just upfront loan forgiveness. So that's where we're at with Tri-Park.
Okay.
All right. So as requested by the Act 179 report, we have been working pretty closely with Vermont Housing and Finance Authority and just doing some research about what other states do and how we might optimize the program to be able to serve this specific community a little bit more closely. We identified 3 main areas, and I think some of this, I think Jen touched on a bunch of these at the beginning. Access to the programs, SRF, USDA, CDBG, all of these big federal programs don't come to the state for free. They all have their own requirements that need some level of administrative capacity to maneuver and actual expertise in managing these different programs. So access is definitely a huge issue with getting these systems connected to lower finance loans or even grant funding. Dedicated special conditions for mobile home, manufactured home communities. Special allowances. In other words, Eric has mentioned additional subsidy, which works like we give you a loan for $100,000 and we forgive, let's say, half of it. So specific dedicated conditions for manufactured home communities is a definite need. And the third is really the coordination of all these other funding sources. So just today, listening to everyone talk, I'm already thinking, how could we combine all of these options out there into some type of a basket so that we can make the access easier, streamline? For example, if we need to do an environmental review or a financial evaluation of the system, if there's some way to bring those together. So we identified those as for us in the SRF, some of the biggest challenges. So relating to access, we're some of this is in the relatively exploratory area, and some of this we've actually already are ready to propose to start changing our program to use funds specifically. So some of these are, we need to study it for a little bit more. We need to understand how we can use this money the ways that we want. And some of it we're ready to just say, let's just do it and change it. So
do you make those changes in-house through procedures, or do you need regulatory change or statutory change to do that?
Most of them we can make through an annual process called the intended use plan. And that sort of goes through a public process, but is not specifically statutory. That's a little bit easier for us to make those changes. I'll run through some of the real meat of what we can change. And there are a couple of opportunities that might benefit from statutory change if we decide to go that direction. So one opportunity related to access, we've heard many people say, you know, this having an expert to do the hand-holding through the whole process is definitely a challenge. When Seth and I started talking in December, January, and drafting this report, we were, you know, it always goes back to, well, should we hire more people? And that's always a great thing to do. State resources, we're not continually adding new employees whenever a need is identified. So one thing that we began brainstorming with Vermont Housing and Finance Authority was actually the creation of something called a linked deposit program. And that works. I won't go into great detail. There's some information in the Act 179 report, but rather than coming to DEC, USDA, navigating the federal requirements and all of those, the federal things that come with it, we would just deposit our money in an institution, in this case, potentially VHFA, and we actually would just buy down the interest rate for these manufactured home communities. So they don't even see us. And from an EPA perspective, they only view it as an investment of our money, and they don't view it as a loan. So it puts some distance between all the federal requirements. So we're beginning to.
Teresa, I'm going to have to cut you off. We have to be on the floor in 30 seconds, but we'll continue this conversation. It sounds pretty exciting. We love to break down silos. So